It wasn't just another Western. 3:10 to Yuma, 1957, reshaped the entire genre. Instead of endless shootouts and dusty cliches, it delivered tension, psychology, and moral ambiguity that left audiences shaken. But what if we told you the film's greatest shocks weren't on the screen? What if the real drama was unfolding behind the camera, in the casting, and even in the way the movie was edited and released? Today, we're uncovering 25 secrets hidden for decades about 3:10 to Yuma, secrets that will forever change how you see this classic. The title came from a real train schedule. This wasn't just a catchy title. The 3:10 to Yuma train was based on an actual timetable in the Southern Pacific Railroad's Arizona line. Elmore Leonard, who wrote the original short story in 1953, picked the specific time after studying train schedules to make the plot feel authentic. Leonard was obsessed with grounding his westerns in reality, and the 3:10 departure was chosen because it created just enough suspense, a ticking clock against which the character's morality would be tested. Audiences never realized they were watching a story built around a real logistical detail. That ordinary train schedule became a cinematic symbol of justice, fate, and inevitability. Ford flipped the villain script. Glenn Ford wasn't supposed to play Ben Wade as charming. Traditionally, Western villains were snarling, one-note outlaws, but Ford made a radical choice. He gave Wade humor, warmth, and even flirtatious charm. This shocked audiences in 1957, who found themselves both fearing and liking him. Ford argued that the real danger of a manipulative man wasn't his violence, but his ability to win people over. This decision influenced future anti-heroes, from Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name to modern television criminals like Tony Soprano. In many ways, Ford's performance redefined what a Western villain could be. Van Heflin wasn't the studio's first choice. What fans never realized was that Van Heflin, who played the desperate rancher Dan Evans, wasn't Columbia Pictures' top pick. Studio heads wanted a bigger box office draw, like Henry Fonda or James Stewart. But director Delmer Daves fought for Heflin, arguing that his ordinary man persona would make Evans's struggle more believable. Heflin wasn't glamorous, and that was exactly the point. He represented every man caught between poverty and honor. Ironically, his grounded performance is now considered one of the film's strongest assets, proving that sometimes a studio's second choice can become unforgettable. The film was shot in record time. Unlike sprawling epics of the 1,950 seconds that took months to complete, 3:10 to Yuma was filmed in just over 30 days. Columbia Pictures wanted a low-budget, quick turnaround production. Director Delmer Daves leaned into this constraint, using minimal locations and focusing on claustrophobic tension instead of sweeping landscapes. The short schedule forced the crew to innovate with lighting and staging, giving the movie its famously tight, noir-like atmosphere. Audiences assumed the intimacy was a stylistic flourish, but in truth, it was born from budget pressure. Sometimes, limitations create genius, and 3:10 to Yuma is proof. It borrowed more from film noir than classic westerns. This wasn't just a western, it was a psychological noir in cowboy boots. Delmer Daves deliberately used shadow-heavy cinematography, moral ambiguity, and slow-burn suspense borrowed from crime films. Of the 1,940 seconds, the small hotel room where much of the story unfolds feels more like a noir interrogation chamber than a western saloon. Even the pacing, the build toward an inevitable, clock-driven climax, echoes noir's obsession with fate. Critics at the time didn't quite know how to categorize it, which may explain its modest box office. Only later did film scholars recognize 3:10 to Yuma as one of the first true Western noir hybrids. The original short story was only 18 pages long. What fans didn't know was that 3:10 to Yuma started as a tiny short story by Elmore Leonard, published in Dime Western magazine in 1953. Just 18 pages long, it was a lean tale of tension between a captured outlaw and the man escorting him. Director Delmer Daves and screenwriter Halstead Wells expanded it into a full-length feature by fleshing out the townspeople, the rancher's family, and the psychological duels between characters. Every extra scene, like the famous hotel room standoff, was an invention for the film. Leonard himself admitted he was stunned by how Hollywood transformed his brief sketch into a cinematic milestone. What was once pulp became poetry. Glenn Ford's contract gave him unusual control. Glenn Ford wasn't just the star. He wielded serious influence. His contract allowed him to approve his own wardrobe, props, and even some dialogue tweaks. Ford insisted Ben Wade shouldn't look like a cliché gunslinger. He wore a stylish black suit that made him appear more businessman than outlaw. It was a bold choice that set him apart visually and psychologically. He also pushed for moments of humor, saying they'd make Wade more unpredictable. This was rare in the 1,950 seconds studio system, where actors usually followed the script to the letter. Ford's behind-the-scenes power helped shape one of the genre's most nuanced villains. The town of Contention was pure fiction. Audiences assumed Contention, Arizona, was a real Wild West town. In truth, it was a Hollywood invention. While some Arizona towns did inspire the name, no such train station or setting ever existed. Production designer Carrie Odell constructed Contention on Columbia's sound stages, using minimal sets to create the illusion of a bustling frontier hub. This gave the filmmakers total control over geography, which helped craft the claustrophobic mood. Ironically, the name Contention became symbolic. It wasn't just a town, it was the essence of the film: conflict, moral struggle, and the tension between law and lawlessness. 9. The score was by a legendary composer. What gave 3:10 to Yuma its pulse wasn't just the ticking clock, it was George Duning's haunting score. Duning, who had worked on everything from Picnic to From Here to Eternity, blended sparse guitar notes with tense orchestral swells. The main theme became so iconic, it was later re-recorded by Frankie Laine as a hit single. Laine's voice, dripping with drama, helped promote the movie far beyond typical Western audiences. Critics often credit the score with elevating the film into mythic territory. Without that mournful, driving music, the story might have felt smaller. Instead, it sounded larger than life. The hotel room scene broke Hollywood rules. In the 1,950 seconds, Westerns were supposed to be about wide-open landscapes and shootouts. But 3:10 to Yuma broke the mold by placing its most gripping action in a cramped hotel room. Dan Evans and Ben Wade face off in a psychological duel, with tension crackling through every line of dialogue. Director Delmer Daves used low angles, long shadows, and lingering silences to build suspense, defying Hollywood norms. At the time, critics were baffled. Was this even a Western? But the scene became a landmark in film history, influencing later chamber-style thrillers. Sometimes, the smallest rooms hold the biggest battles. Columbia Pictures saw it as a B picture. What audiences never knew was that Columbia Pictures didn't expect 3:10 to Yuma to be a prestige film. In fact, executives considered it a quick, low-budget Western meant to fill theater schedules. The studio had little faith in Westerns beyond John Wayne blockbusters, so they gave Delmer Daves minimal resources. But Daves turned the supposed B picture into a psychological masterpiece. He leaned into tension, character depth, and atmosphere instead of spectacle. By the time critics praised the film for its artistry, Columbia realized, too late, they had underestimated its value. What was once dismissed as minor became one of the studio's crown jewels. Glenn Ford and Van Heflin swapped hero, divided by villain roles, in life. Here's a twist. Glenn Ford was famous in real life for his gentlemanly, responsible behavior, while Van Heflin had a reputation for being more cynical and brooding off-camera. Director Delmer Daves loved this irony. On screen, Ford played the charming outlaw, and Heflin portrayed the upright rancher. Audiences unknowingly watched two men essentially trading their real personalities. This role reversal gave their performances an uncanny edge, because both were stretching against type. It's one of those rare moments where casting magic creates layers audiences can feel, but never fully explain. If you're hooked on these secrets, go ahead and like and subscribe. because we're only halfway through, and the wildest ones are still coming. The ending was almost completely different. Originally, the film's climax didn't have Ben Wade help Dan Evans onto the train. In early drafts, Evans was meant to deliver Wade alone while fighting off the outlaw gang. Glenn Ford objected, saying Wade's cooperation would make the character more complex. He pushed for an ending where Wade willingly boards the train, hinting at a strange respect for Evans. Director Delmer Daves agreed, and the new finale added a moral ambiguity that made audiences debate Wade's true motives for decades. It wasn't just about justice, it was about loyalty, pride, and perhaps even redemption. The townsfolk represented real social criticism. The cowardly townspeople in 3:10 to Yuma weren't just filler characters, they were Delmer Daves' commentary on society's reluctance to act against evil. Critics have often compared the film to High Noon 1952, which used a similar theme of abandonment and civic weakness. In 3:10 to Yuma, the rancher stands almost alone, while the town hides. This wasn't just storytelling, it was a reflection of Cold War America, when fears of standing up during political witch hunts haunted the nation. Daves wove social critique into the Western, proving the genre could carry weighty themes. The film influenced a generation of directors. What audiences didn't realize in 1957 was that 3:10 to Yuma would quietly inspire some of cinema's greatest directors. Martin Scorsese has praised its noir style. Quentin Tarantino cited its dialogue-driven tension, and James Mangold later directed the 2007 remake as a personal homage. The film's balance of suspense, moral conflict, and character depth became a template for filmmakers looking to elevate genre movies into art. In other words, this wasn't just a Western, it was a blueprint for how to make thrillers that stand the test of time.